Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the people meant to love you the most are the ones who leave the deepest scars. Imagine being told by your own parents that your sister deserved a future, and you didn't. Not because you failed, but because they never believed in you to begin with. This isn't just a story about family. It's about betrayal wrapped in birthday candles, favoritism disguised as tough love, and one young woman who was forced to build a life from the ashes of being ignored. But what happens when the invisible daughter becomes the one the world can't stop talking about? Stay with us, because the moment her parents finally saw her wasn't filled with pride, it was filled with regret. Let's begin. Harper Blake never expected that her college graduation, the day meant to crown years of grueling effort, would instead become the perfect stage for a reckoning. The auditorium was bursting with applause, the university president's voice echoing through speakers, but her eyes weren't on the stage. They were locked on two faces in the front row, frozen in disbelief, her parents. But that comes later. To understand the storm that had been building, you need to return to a quiet, seemingly perfect neighborhood in Carmel, Indiana. White fences, trimmed lawns, neighbors who smiled too widely but never looked too close. The Blakes fit in just right, on paper. Mark Blake, a CPA with a neat tie and a tighter sense of propriety. Karen Blake, high school English teacher with a penchant for order and tradition. Madison, their golden girl. And Harper, well, Harper was something else entirely. Growing up, Harper learned early that love in her house came with a report card. But even when she aced her classes, earned honors, and won regional business plan competitions, the applause always seemed to land elsewhere, mostly in Madison's direction. Madison, with her camera-ready smile and student government campaigns. Madison, who was always just a bit more everything. Harper stopped expecting equal treatment the Christmas she was 14. While Madison unwrapped a sleek new iPad with wide-eyed delight, Harper found a calculator and a pair of thermal socks under the tree. Practical gifts for a practical girl, her mother had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't the presents. It was the pattern. Encouragement, investment, celebration. They flowed in one direction only. And it wasn't hers. By the time she reached high school, Harper had built a fortress out of composure and ambition. She worked part-time at Bean & Co., a local cafe, and secretly read case studies about female founders and digital startups while wiping tables. Her grandmother, June, was the only adult who seemed to really see her. On weekends at Grandma's lake house, Harper would sit on the dock sketching plans for a future she knew she'd have to build herself. "You've got a wildfire in you, Harper," June would whisper. "It's not their job to see it, it's yours to feed it." The acceptance letter from Crestwood University came in a thick envelope that felt impossibly heavy in Harper's hands. A full ride to the business program. She didn't scream. She didn't jump up and down. She held it like a fragile truth she'd earned with sleepless nights and silent tears. That night, during dinner, she announced it calmly. "That's great, honey," her father said, glancing at his phone. "Did you remember to send Madison's resume to that internship lead I gave you?" 15 minutes later, Madison burst through the door with her own Crestwood letter. Her parents stood, hugged, opened champagne. Harper watched the bubbles rise in the glass and imagined each one bursting like the words she would never say aloud. Then came the betrayal that unraveled everything. 2 weeks after the double acceptance, Harper found herself at the dinner table again, this time facing the cold truth. "We've saved for one college tuition," her father said, not meeting her eyes, "and we believe Madison is the best investment." Investment, like she was a stock that didn't show enough promise. "You've always been more independent," Karen added, patting Harper's hand as if the gesture could soften the gutting blow. "You'll figure something out. Loans, maybe, or a different school. You're resourceful." And then, the sentence that would etch itself into her bones forever. "She deserves it. You don't." She didn't cry that night. Not in front of them. She waited until the house fell silent and then buried her face into her pillow, the scream trapped in her throat like an iron weight. Her whole life she'd tried to earn what was freely given to Madison, and now they had confirmed her deepest fear. She was invisible. The next morning, she packed a bag and drove 2 hours to Grandma June's house. June listened, made tea, and said nothing until Hopper had poured it all out. Rage, betrayal, the aching loss of a childhood lie that parents love equally. "My sweet girl," June finally said, her voice low, almost dangerous, "they don't see you. But one day, they will. And when they do, it'll be too late for them to catch up." Hopper took those words and turned them into war paint. She chose Crestwood. She chose the loans, the double shifts, the basement apartment with a leaking faucet and paper-thin walls. She chose the sleepless nights, the isolation, the unforgiving schedule. And behind it all, she built something. A small, scrappy digital marketing business that grew, brick by digital brick, as her life quietly rewrote itself. Her parents didn't ask how she was doing, but she didn't need them to. They thought they had chosen the right daughter. And that's why, 4 years later, sitting in the front row of Crestwood's grand auditorium, they had no idea what was coming. Have you ever been told, in words or in silence, that you weren't enough? What did it take to finally believe they were wrong? Because sometimes, the loudest vindication is what they never saw coming. And just as Hopper stepped onto that stage to deliver the valedictorian speech, no one thought would bear her name, the next secret was already waiting, ready to explode her story wide open in part 2. The silence that followed Hopper's speech was brief, only seconds, but it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the world holding its breath before the fall. And then came the explosion, applause so loud it echoed off the high ceilings of Crestwood's auditorium. She stood at the podium, stunned, as the weight of what she just revealed settled over the room. Her parents' faces were unreadable, somewhere between confusion, embarrassment, and disbelief. Her mother clutched her program like a shield. Her father's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching near his temple. But Hopper didn't return to her seat just yet. The university president stepped forward again, smiling warmly. "That was extraordinary," he said, then turned to the crowd. "But Miss Blake's story doesn't end there." The room, already hushed, grew quieter still. In addition to being this year's valedictorian, Hopper Blake is the recipient of the National Collegiate Innovation Award for her work launching a digital marketing agency serving underrepresented small businesses. The board of Crestwood University has also named her the inaugural recipient of our new Rising Resilience Fellowship. He turned back to her. "And one final announcement. Beginning next year, the Hopper Blake Initiative for Student Equity will provide financial support to first-generation and unsupported students seeking to build something out of nothing, just as Hopper has." A standing ovation. From the stage, Hopper saw Grandma June rise slowly, a hand pressed to her chest, eyes shimmering with pride. Behind her, Madison was clapping hard enough to bruise her palms. But Mark and Karen Blake didn't stand, didn't clap. They sat still, like they just realized the foundation of their world had cracked. Hopper stepped off the stage not feeling triumphant, but numb. Later, as the crowd dispersed, relatives approached with congratulations. Professors offered hugs. Former classmates looked at her with newfound awe, like they'd only just learned she was someone worth noticing. But then came the moment she hadn't prepared for. "Hopper," her mother called, catching up to her outside the auditorium beneath the university's stone archway. That speech was powerful. She waited as if searching for the next right word. "I wish you'd told us things were that hard for you." Hopper turned slowly. "I did. You just didn't hear me." Her mother flinched. Her father stepped in. "Let's not turn this into a scene. You've clearly done well. Can't we move forward?" She wanted to scream or cry or run, but what she did was colder, sharper. "That depends," Hopper said, "on whether you're moving forward because you're proud or because now you have to be." They didn't answer. Madison joined them a moment later, looping her arm through Hopper's. "We're heading to the business school reception," she said brightly, and to her parents, "You two might want to sit this one out." Hopper didn't look back. Inside the reception, Hopper was surrounded by mentors, teammates, supporters, the people who had seen her. Riley found her first, gripping her shoulders like she might float away. "You killed it," she whispered. "Did you see their faces?" "I saw everything," Hopper murmured. Later, Professor Jameson pulled her aside. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice low. "2 weeks ago, I was approached by a publishing house. They're compiling a collection of real student stories. Grit, self-reliance, that sort of thing. I submitted your name." Hopper blinked. "Without asking?" Jameson smiled. "With respect, you were going to say no, and the world needs your voice." Hopper felt a strange twist in her chest. Her voice. For so long it had felt like something fragile, tucked away in journal margins or buried beneath forced smiles. Now people wanted to amplify it. "But there's more," Jameson added. "They're not just interested in your story, they're interested in you. Full memoir. Your life, your words." The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. The spotlight was beginning to turn into something she hadn't prepared for. Visibility beyond her control. "I don't know if I want to be known," Hopper admitted. "Not like that." Jameson's gaze was steady. "That's the power. You get to decide how you're seen. You've earned that." Hopper nodded slowly, but her heart beat faster. What if telling her story meant reopening wounds she hadn't fully healed from? What if it made her parents' silence louder, more public, more permanent? But then, what if it gave someone else the strength to rise? That night, back at Grandma June's lake house, Hopper sat alone on the old porch swing, the wind cutting sharp across the water. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked when June came out with 2 mugs of tea. "Raising Dad the way you did?" June took her time, settling beside her. "I raised him to be strong. I didn't teach him softness. Maybe that was my failing." Hopper watched the reflection of the moon shiver on the lake. "I keep thinking if I say the right thing, they'll finally see me. But maybe they never will." "They might," June said, "or they might not. But that's not the point." "Then what is?" "That you see yourself. Clearly. Without needing their eyes to confirm it." Hopper sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her. Then she opened her laptop. On the screen, the email from the publisher. She stared at the cursor blinking beside the draft title. She deserved it, so did I. And in that moment, Hopper understood. Maybe the next chapter wasn't about proving anything. Maybe it was about choosing what to do now that she had nothing left to prove. What would you do if your greatest pain became your greatest platform, and the world suddenly wanted to listen? Because as Hopper begins to write the story of her life, what she doesn't know is that her most personal truth is about to become very, very public. Stay tuned for part 3. The first line Hopper typed was the hardest. Not because she didn't know what to say, she had lived every word of it, but because putting it down meant facing the truth in ink. That truth wasn't just about neglect or resilience, it was about longing. For most of her life, she had wanted nothing more than for her parents to look at her and see her. She wrote through the night. The memoir, originally intended as a short piece in an anthology, grew into something else. A raw, unfiltered account of being overlooked, of building a life in the absence of permission. She named it Unchosen. By the time she sent the draft to the editor, the sun was climbing over the lake, its light catching the frost on the dockboards like shattered glass. Days passed. The publishing house replied with a stunned acceptance and an aggressive timeline. The story, they said, was electric, timely, honest in ways that made people uncomfortable. And that's why it needed to be told. But Hopper hesitated. What would happen when the world saw how deeply her parents had failed her? Would it just be more shame, more distance? Or was this her moment to reclaim the narrative and give it to others who had lived in the margins? Then came the call. Her mother. Karen Blake's voice on the other end was brittle. "I read the article," she said. "The university posted the speech. Your name's everywhere now." Hopper waited. "I didn't know that it had hurt you like that," Karen continued. "Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to admit it." Hopper's grip on the phone tightened. "There's going to be a book, isn't there?" her mother asked. "Yes," Hopper said simply. Another long silence. "We'll be in it?" "You already are." Karen inhaled, slow and shaky. "Will you change our names?" "I thought about it," Hopper replied. "But no, you always told me to own my choices. This is me doing that." A pause. "Then I hope you're kind." That was the thing, Hopper realized. She was kind. She had carried their names with her, their rejection, their favoritism, and still she had never turned cruel. She'd only told the truth they didn't want written down. The book was published 6 months later. It debuted quietly, an indie imprint, modest rollout. But something about it struck a nerve. A popular therapist on TikTok read an excerpt aloud. A podcast on childhood trauma used it as a case study. Then a morning show host mentioned it in her book club segment. This is the book I didn't know I needed until I sobbed on the last page. Within a month, Unchosen climbed bestseller lists. Strangers sent emails from across the country, grown adults who had lived in the same shadow Hopper once occupied. Some wrote just to say thank you. Others wrote paragraphs detailing their own private wars, overlooked talents, abandoned dreams, parents who said not you. But then, something unexpected happened. Madison sent her a draft of an essay. It was for an educational nonprofit newsletter, titled The Other Sister. In it, Madison confessed to growing up with an unease she couldn't name until her 20s. I was the favorite, she wrote, but it felt like a spotlight I didn't earn. And in its glow, I lost sight of the person standing in the dark beside me. Hopper read the essay twice, then sat very still, the paper trembling in her hands. She wasn't the only one who had suffered, and that truth hit harder than any betrayal. Madison called later that night. I didn't want to ask permission, she said, because I thought you might tell me no, but if you want me to pull it, I will. No, Hopper said, it's good, and it's true. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was thoughtful, deep. There's something else, Madison said quietly. I'm starting a program at the nonprofit. We're calling it the Unchosen Fund, to support students who are overlooked, underestimated. I want to name it after you. Hopper's throat tightened. You don't have to do that. I know, Madison replied. That's why I want to. The day Unchosen was adapted into a short film for a streaming platform. Hopper flew to Los Angeles for the premiere. The auditorium was smaller than her graduation had been, but somehow it felt heavier. More intimate. Her words, once whispered only in therapy sessions or midnight journals, were now projected on a screen 40 feet wide. Grandma June, dressed in her best navy dress and pearls, held Hopper's hand the whole screening. Afterward, in the Q&A, a young woman stood up. I read your book right after my dad told me I wasn't good enough to apply to NYU, she said. I applied anyway. I got in. Your story made me believe maybe I didn't need anyone's permission either. Hopper smiled, tears in her eyes. You don't. You never did. Back home, in the quiet that comes only after great noise, Hopper walked along the edge of the lake where it all began. The wind was sharp, the sky streaked in early evening gold. She thought of her father. They hadn't spoken since the book came out. A part of her still waited, for an apology, for a letter or something. But another part had let go. Sometimes people don't apologize, and you heal anyway. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a reader in Dublin. Another from a teacher in South Africa, asking to use a chapter in her curriculum. Another from a girl in Oklahoma who just said, "You wrote my life." She looked out over the lake and smiled, the bracelet from Grandma June glinting on her wrist. She wasn't writing to be seen anymore. She was writing so others would know they weren't alone. And sometimes that's all the light anyone needs. What part of Hopper's journey resonated most deeply with you? Comment 100 if this story moved you. Where are you watching from today? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Thank you for watching Life Stories.